So good morning, Pedro and Philip. Welcome back after a week and to our second discussion. And to anyone out there listening, everyone out there listening, welcome wherever you are at whatever time it is. And we're glad to have you participate in this. And it makes the whole purpose of this purposeful to know that your ears are there and listening and giving us a chance to share experience and develop our own skill at talking about our experience while offering some insight we trust may come your way. So good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Jack. Morning, Pedro.
Good morning, Jack. Good morning, Philip.
So last week we covered a lot of ground, a lot of the woes of the world. I think we left with a question from Philip, which was, how can I be more connected to truth and reality than the stories in my head? And Pedro, we never quite got a question from you. And if there's anything that occurred to you during the week and as a result of the conversation, you can always mention that.
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things I'd like to suggest, given that this is a conversation about the mental obsession, is that we really consider what we're doing together now as what's happening. And since it is happening and it's happening between us, the discussions we have, I find it easy to go off in directions about what's wrong with the world because I see so much wrong in the world, and it's often easier for me to see that than it is to see my culpability and my participation and the thoughts I'm having about it that may or may not be what the world is doing, when in fact I'm overlooking or jumping over the thinking I'm doing about it and not quite using that thinking as an indication of what I'm largely experiencing, rather than what I think I'm experiencing and everyone else and everything else. So our chance to discuss this is to look at it a little bit closer as to what we're doing. And one of the things that really stuck in my head during the week, Pedro, was your conversation about the robber in the house and his not feeling bad about what he was doing. And I would suggest that when we're addicted to sick thoughts, we feel good doing the wrong thing. Just like someone who's addicted to heroin thinks the best thing they can do is more heroin. And it clearly puts their life at risk while they're imagining their life is being saved by it. So that twist is really at the root of this thinking. And my experience is that most of this thinking I'm doing, I don't think I'm doing. And that's where it gets a little seemingly murky and dark, because I don't even notice it to the degree that I'm making believe all I'm doing is what I think I'm doing, and anything else would be preposterous to consider. And yet, dark moods descend, and sense of depression descends, and sense of conflicts descend, and contempt descends, and ideas I have about people that put me at odds with them while I'm trying to get even being at odds. Doesn't make sense. So I suspect those issues that raise up and elevate, and that I tend to see more in my interactions with people than the conversation I have in my head that serves itself all the time, starts to allow me a little broader view of what I'm actually doing relative to what I think I'm doing, and start to correct and modify and discuss and expose and talk about it openly. So that was the thing that stuck in my head, aside from your question, Philip.
Well, one thing I would say is that, yeah, I mean, he may feel good and addicted to that, swapping over the bad feelings for the good feelings because he's got one off on somebody, over somebody. However, if he gets caught, all those bad feelings that he suppressed will be coming rushing back in a very paramount and profound way.
Well, and you're referring to the fact that when we're sick in our thinking and feel better about being wrong, we're actually creating the wrong while thinking it's right. And that's the conflict. There is addiction.
Yep.
So the wrong doesn't go away. We actually start building a resistance and desensitization to it until it either gets to a point where it's too much for us to bear any longer. And what you tend to hear people say is, I can't take it anymore. And it's what they're doing they can't take. Or things go wrong to finally reveal that all that right I thought I was doing and getting wasn't right at all. It was clearly in violations of things I was completely trying to be oblivious to, in that same numbness that I wasn't acknowledging what I was doing. So yes, that's sort of the watershed of it all. Now, when I'm expressing what I'm doing, even if my thought is wrong, there's no conflict in talking about a wrong thought is wrong at all. It frees me from it, recognizing that it doesn't free me from it, but I'm acting in accordance with how things are happening. So I don't become seemingly a victim to it, so I can blame the thought and all the wrong in the world to justify the wrong I'm continuing to perpetuate and claim is right. When I'm thinking wrong is wrong, I'm aligning with how things are. There's no condemnation in that. I have a sense of freedom, and I don't have a sense that I need to continue to maintain it, because now I recognize clearly there's freedom of choice at any moment to continue to nurse the wrong thought, or just say, if it's wrong, and let it go and continue to function in a way that uses that as a guidance system rather than something to oppose and make believe I'm going to get better, when in fact it causes all those twisted versions of who I think I am and what I need to do, and starts to create this sort of path of wrong and destruction that I perpetuate.
Well, I do think that right and wrong is actually a man-made concept. It's not actually absolute in nature. So I think that's one place that we get off on, is getting into this conversation of this is right, this is wrong. However, I do agree that if we look a little bit underneath it, there is a good and bad, there is a healthy and unhealthy, it works and doesn't work, and truthful and truth and untruth. I think sometimes we hide into the right and wrong concept, and it gets us a little bit off the path, because if we use languaging like good or bad or healthy and unhealthy, I think we would have a less propensity to addiction, or a less inclination to addiction.
So you find yourself doing that. You find yourself doing that. As you're aware of it being done, you're finding yourself do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my sense is there's nothing wrong with wrong when it's wrong. The wrong is making believe it's right. That's where the wrong comes in. And there's nothing other than a human construct there. It's not an absolute. It's something humans do. It doesn't violate any absolute fundamental basis for existence at all. It doesn't violate our being nature as truth. It simply creates a human experience that's in conflict with the human experience created by the human creating the experience. That's it. So our struggles are never with peace and truth and reality and love. Our struggles are always with what we think about it. And that is on us. We're not condemned to that. We're given all possibility. And as a result, if we abuse that possibility, we're misusing what we've given. And my sense, Philip, is what you're pointing to is that things either work, which means we're functioning and align with how things are, or they don't work, which means we're not functioning and we're maligned with how things are. So if we're creating a productive result, that product is beneficial to everyone. If we're creating a result that we think is good for us, it's generally hurting everyone else. And that would sort of define the robber too, Santiago. As you mentioned, when Pedro mentioned the robber, whose name I don't think he knew, but when Pedro mentioned the robber, he was talking about the fact that he didn't appreciate the impact he had from the robbery. And it's true, because I would say that's accurate, because we're basically obsessed with our own thinking when we're thinking obsessive thoughts. And all we think about is the benefit and the bonus, while we dismiss all of the impacts of what we're doing. And that's more of what you were talking about, Philip, in terms of the wrong eventually becoming exposed. And my sense is nobody lives comfortably with themselves when they're doing that stuff. And it is the primary source of our own sense of doubt and lack of self-worth and lack of self-esteem.
Yeah, and most likely to live with that wrong, I think that person probably has another addiction, probably alcohol or drug related, to numb the feelings, or
Yes.
food addiction. Um, I mean,
Well, the stealing would be an addiction in the sense that it's giving him an exhilaration and a sense of getting away with something, just like the drug use and the alcohol. No compulsion that we ever act on is good for us. Nobody suffers from eating too much asparagus and broccoli. There are always things we do that are in some way undermining our health and undermining our nature. And they're all attempts to make believe that we can control what's out of control. And so we never gain control as long as we make believe that's going to be true and real. And again, you can see the dichotomy of thoughts opposing one another, trying to claim what's out of control can be controlled. What I have no power over, I have power over. Same as the thinking that I can do it without consequence, and I can do what's wrong and pretend it's good because it serves some addictive need to me. Because the basis of all compulsions are addictive thoughts, all of them.
How you define wrong, Jack?
Well, certainly not right. Something that doesn't work, something that doesn't help, something that isn't generous, something that isn't loving, something that's inconsiderate. I mean, as I just described it, I would say it just doesn't work in the world. It doesn't align. Like you were planting tomatoes, right? Yesterday?
Yes.
And you knew that that was a specific day to do that because of where the moon was, that there was some impact on how the lunar positioning impacts growth of vegetables. And I would say that skill was developed over time to help produce value and produce. And produce is basically a product. And so if those things are done well, we tend to have more to eat. And if they're done poorly, we tend to have less to eat. So if the decision making is what makes the difference, then I would say what is wrong is what doesn't work, what doesn't function, what's dysfunctional and unhealthy and diseased, what causes a lack of ease in humans. We're designed to eat. We're designed to breathe. We're designed to drink liquids, clean water, not poison water, not poison foods. And you give great care to what you do, as I know from eating the tomatoes. And the season is coming back. So I would say function in a single word, Pedro. Would align with what's right.
I would say it's also similar to win-win versus win-lose situations.
Exactly.
Like win-lose situations, I take from you, you have less. Win-win is we both benefit and have more.
Exactly. And that in an absolute nature, you can give everything away. And what do you get? Everything. It's what the paradoxes are in Alcoholics Anonymous. We give it away to keep it. We surrender to win. We literally give it up to have it. And that shows that this, when you're dealing on an absolute premise, which we are, and we're thinking it in terms, human terms of he gets less, I get more, we're creating the conflict we claim to be trying to get secured from by having more. We have more by taking more from somebody else, which creates somebody who now wants more of what we have. And the security we're trying to create with it is the insecurity we're trying to create. We're ending up creating by it, if you follow me. So in the same way, we're losing. It's never a win. It's only a perceived win in the name of eventually losing, just like the guy thinks what he's done is good because he got away with it. But it's like water building up behind the dam. Eventually, if the water goes over the dam's going to collapse.
I'd say a very quick, you're usually good at analogies, but let me try it. It's kind of like going into the ocean and saying this wave that's coming is just a drop of water. Yes. Let's say like a 10-foot wave. And you're like, it's just a drop of water. It's just a drop of water. Well, at some point you're going to realize, and reality is going to show you that it's not a drop of water. However, if you were to go into the ocean with a surfboard or a kayak or a stand-up paddle, and you said that 10-foot wave is a 10-foot wave, and you know how to utilize it so that you can ride it just like dolphins do, you would be able to have a pretty good time if you have that skill set and that level of expertise with 10-foot waves. And the fact that animals mammals and a human can both do the same thing if they recognize it, the 10-foot wave, as a 10-foot wave and not as a drop of water. Well, I don't know if a dolphin can tell. Well, I guess they can tell the difference between a drop of water and not.
So if you thought it was a drop of water and went out there, you'd probably end up drowned.
Yeah.
So again, if what's right is to approach to have things as they are, I would suggest, and ultimately having things as they are is humble, because we're not making more or less out of them. We're letting them be. We're giving ourselves a chance to have a relationship with them, since we're interacting with them already as what they are rather than what we think they are. And when we think what they are is all they are, whatever our thinking is that isn't accurate about what they are is in conflict with our entire environment. And it's not our environment that's attacking us. It's the misuse of thought that we're applying, rather than recognizing when there's a conflict. If you're trying to cut a piece of wood and you need a piece longer than the piece of wood you have, that would be, you could try forever and never get it done, because the wood isn't long enough. At some point, it's worth noting, the wood's not long enough. I need a longer piece of wood. That seems silly to mention. And yet it's what we do with the thinking we have when we think that if it isn't working and we continue, someday it will, while we're just basically burying ourselves, at least the self we think we are, in ideas that are constantly circulating in the voices in our head and going on in the stories that we tell to justify the excuses that we make. And eventually get to a point where we don't understand what's wrong, because we've become masters at pretending what's wrong is right, rather than beginning to unravel it. We don't have to wait for pain to admit things. We know quickly when things are wrong. I would say we know immediately. We wouldn't defend them and pretend they're right if we didn't know they were wrong.
Do you think it could
Sorry, Phil.
You can go, Pedro.
No, I was going to ask you guys, what do you think are the consequences to live in the wrong, to perpetuate the wrong over and
as
over
right?
and over again? Yes.
Disease.
Yeah, unhealth, toxic pollution, toxic thoughts, anger, hostility, violence, psychopathic behavior, sociopathic behavior, ideas that you're all alone in the world and the world hates you and the world is worth then hating. And
Well, just by the nature of, you believe in something that actually isn't there, and you have to constantly force yourself and hope, and at some point other people, to believe how you believe, you're going to have to create some kind of destruction in some manner,
well, the destruction is already happening in the idea that you're thinking about something that doesn't exist with a thought that it exists. The destruction is in recognizing that you're giving nothing credit for being everything, right? So it's going to be the behavior is going to be destructive because it's trying to mimic this unreality. And what are we going to do? Nothing that's going to prove us wrong. We're going to do everything we can to prove us right by creating destruction, to claim that's the nature of our existence, because the nature of the thought has absolutely no base. It's already destroyed, effectively. All we're giving it is the attention we're paying now, thinking it's there. And the longer we do it, the longer we think it's real, because we've done it so long, it must be real. And boy, I'd be stupid and idiotic to do this so long if it weren't. And yes, that's exactly the truth. In case we're stupid and idiotic for continuing. When we're rational enough to look at it, it becomes silly, rather than taking it so seriously that we want to shoot ourselves in the head over it. When it's just a thought, it's simply a thought. Now, in the present, where we are.
So if we look at our country and most of the world, all the words that you have said, Jack: toxic, violent, psychopath, destruction, pollution. Looks like we must be living in the wrong for a very, very long time, because all those manifestations are all around us.
Yes, sir. I am with you 100. You know, I don't think any of us have grown up and not been aware that something is seriously wrong. And
Well, maybe what is wrong is that we have not made America great again.
oh, you know, I think my sense is that the greatest trauma we've all suffered is being complacent and aligning ourselves with the lunacy of convention. And often within culture, there are conventions that are not true or real, that are basically repeated over and over again, simply on the basis of a cultural distinction, that aren't true and real. And my sense is we're heartbroken over it. I felt that way when I was a kid, and it wasn't because of the way my parents treated me or any of that kind of stuff. I had a sense of displacement. I didn't see my own part in it because I was way too young, but I sensed something was seriously wrong. And I still have that sense. And to start seeing things clearly, not preoccupied with my own central thinking. To see things clearly is to see that there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain that I've been denying because I've been working so hard simply to feel better about denying the fact that I am a part of it all. I am sourced in it all. We are here as compatriots of one another, not distinct and separate as we act and play so often and think we are. We're absolutely together, and we know it, and we recognize it. And my sense is people hurt. That to me is the great trauma, is pretending we're not part of it and we can be separate from it, and all we need to do is carve out a little life that's comfortable. And there's some benefits to that, clearly, but they're just the same kind of benefits that drinking gave me, where I felt better, but in fact, I was just feeling better than worse because I wasn't really acknowledging my own complicity in the nature of the problem. And my suspicion, and Pedro, you and I have spent a lot of time, is that as we talk about it and see and use each other as sounding boards and offer each other our own perspective and get the perspective we each offer each other, it starts to make more sense that we're really not doing anything differently in what we do wrong. We're doing it very similarly with different faces, places, and times. And yet we all have those experiences of saying, wow, I understand exactly what he's saying and exactly what he's doing because I realize I'm doing it. And it often takes that perspective to see it. Just like pain is often the threshold of concession and conceding our role and saying something's wrong here and maybe it's me, rather than everything else and all the excuses I've used. But I think that's beautifully put. And it's kind of what we talked about last week. But I would say that this insight that you just shared, Pedro, is really starting to, if I'm looking at something that's disturbing and I'm not disturbed, I'm psychopathic to the degree that I'm devoid of any connection to what I'm seeing. I'm pretending I'm numb to it when in fact something is wrong. It's like witnessing something that happens that's horrible and just driving past and paying no attention and thinking there's nothing I can do and nothing I should do. And the last thing I should do is get involved. When I'm involved, I'm already involved. We're all involved. And we've been acting as though we're these little separate entities that speak for ourselves and have our own truths. And that sort of behavior just promotes more and more conflict and obviously diminishes our capacity to express the thoughtful nature of an absolute source without having to think and worry about it, because it would just be so natural. We'd start doing it automatically if we started doing it at all. And that's the basis of this discussion, is starting to recognize how, in Sunday's discussion, having 12 people together, or more or less, it's easier for people to sit and listen and see what's happening when they're witnessing somebody else do what they often initially think they're not doing, and eventually say, oh, wow, it took a little bit of perspective to get that. It shows how we really are designed to cooperate and to share with one another and to share the bounty of everything we have, rather than fight over who has more and looks like they have more and thinks they have more, and all those other sort of vain attempts at pretense.
Well, Jack, I learned with you how important is to consider the words we are using. And I just want to bring something to the moment, and if you feel that we should go and talk about it, great. If not, the use of, in our regular life, we said, in our politics, we the Americans, or that joke that I was making before, make America great again. I am an American. Well, what that means, that people south of the border are not Americans, that the only Americans are us. We have take the word America and make it our own. The rest, from south of the border to Tierra del Fuego, they are not Americans. They are Chileans, Argentinians, Nicaraguenses, whatever. We are the only Americans. Looks to me that it's a big lie that we
Yes.
start with.
Well, down in my father lived for 20 years in Mexico, and they never referred to the Americans as Americans. They always referred to us as North Americans, Norte Americanos. So our perception of who we are is much grander than the actual geography that we occupy. Right? Because you're talking about Central, South America is America, Central America is America. I don't know if Mexico fits in North America or Central America, but I would think it's Central, since it's south of North in this case, and Canada must be.
It's North America. Mexico is North America.
Yeah, so Central America ends, North America begins, and again, it's like having the World Series every year in baseball, and nobody from outside our country can play unless they're on an American team. Those are ways of cultivating ideas that give us a sense of loyalty, but they also give us a sense of distinction that puts us at odds with other people, because they're not accurate. They're just inaccuracies. And it's not unusual, it's extremely usual. And my sense is, like when astronomers didn't think that the Earth was at the center of the universe, or they thought the Earth was at the center of the universe, that they came up with all sort of diagrams to explain why the planets and the stars and everything did what they did, that were very complex. Ptolemy was the original astronomer way back, thousands of years ago, who basically crafted justification for the Earth being the center of the world and showed how all the planets basically operated on what are effectively beautiful mosaics of movement, but they're not accurate and had to be modified for the thought. And so, I mean, you also remember when the horizon was thought to be the edge of the world, and a lot of people knew better, and so they sailed freely into the oceans, and others didn't, and so they didn't sail freely and felt they needed to hug the curb and were less exploring. And our discussion is beginning to look at the horizon of our own thoughts as a limit. Isn't a real limit, it's an imagined limit. And recognizing that begins to see that any thought we have that is limited begins at the end of those limits. Everything else begins at the end of those limits. They don't stop there. And if we can act on that basis, we start being more inclusive in the thinking we do and in the words we use too, Pedro, which I believe are very revelatory if people were to listen closer to what they're saying, like the idea that we get away with something when in fact we take that thing we think we're getting away with everywhere we go. It's kind of odd to think we can get away with it simply because, to Philip's point, that we didn't get caught. And yet everywhere we go, we know we did it. And we know what we did wasn't right. And we need to maintain, like Philip described, that obsessive thinking about it to justify it constantly, that just erodes our capacity to be productive in other ways. And in a way, that is a beautiful design we have to show us where we're wrong, when we're wrong, so we can correct what we've done that's wrong and be more participatory at a level that's beneficial to all, rather than constantly challenging everybody and stressing all. And I would say there again is a distinction between right and wrong. What's right would be what's right for everyone. What's true would be what's true for everyone, not what's true for me and not for you.
So my question is, maybe it's switching to a different topic. I'm sorry, Pedro, but I think it's interesting that it's hard for us to become cognizant of right and wrong and all these other different kind of concepts when it's invisible. Like thought, thought is not physicalized in any other way unless we take action or we verbalize it, and it's just not until, you talked about,
You say thought is only, give me that again.
It's only physical when it's expressed or acted upon. Like, oh, why did you do this? Oh, well, I thought this and then I did it. Or this is how I feel, or this is what I'm thinking right now. It's not actually physical to us or to the outside world until we, either verbalize it or take a physical action based on a thought, or write it down per se. So I just think it's interesting, like on Sunday or in other type of group therapies and stuff like that, we don't really start to see what's going on inside of us until we see it in other people. And we're in a place of hurt or pain enough to be able to listen and be open to what is not in our own perception at that moment, or in our perception since that, prior to that moment.
And that's really an admission of a sense of knowing that is being violated by a greater sense of thinking that we don't know. And going back to the beginning of what you said, all voluntary actions we take begin with a thought, all of them. And yet there are actions we're taking all the time that don't have any thought attached to them because our body knows what to do. The delivery of the blood and the oxygen and the vitamins and the minerals and all the stuff the blood is doing knows exactly what to do. And I'm not sitting around worried about it when it's critical to my existence. And what do I worry about? What I'm thinking about. And so my other suggestion, Philip, is that engaging in thoughts are in fact an action. And I think that point is often overlooked, and it's treated as though, because we've treated thinking as something happening to us rather than be created by us for so long, that we've used it to excuse what we do and just say, well, I got a mental problem. I'm just, we seldom even say that. But, I don't know. I don't know what got into me.
Yeah, I can use a personal example. Maybe this will help people. I moved from New York in 2019 back to Los Angeles. It's my my second tour of duty in New York City. I joke in that way. My second 5-year tour. But I remember in that first couple of months, I was getting some rejection, whether it was artistic rejection or B career rejection. And it kind of spun me into a thought pattern of depression. And it was very difficult for me to get out of it. And then, I got out of it a little bit. I started working, and then the pandemic happened. And then I literally eventually and you remember, Jack, I got stuck in kind of a couple loop patterns about day trading, stuff like that. And eventually I got to the place where I put myself in pain and suffering and depression. However, this time, getting myself, I think it was like October 2nd, till the end of, till Thanksgiving, this time to get myself out, like, I went to a different fellowship that helped, but also when I started to have those feelings of depression, I did not let them stop me. I just said, okay, I just feel that, and I have to keep taking action. And that's what I did every day. It was like, 5-6 hours of, whether it was emails to reps or emails to different companies or setting up meetings with, different organizations. Like, I was always doing something for 5-6 hours. And a lot of times during that time, I felt, very down. I felt rejected, but I just kept taking the action. And eventually something broke by Thanksgiving. And, that was very prosperous to me. And then, something else occurred that I couldn't think of would occur just like a month and a half ago. And I don't really want to go into the details of it, but, definitely like a lot of things changed, money, the relationship I was in, a lot of other stuff. It's been very hard to get out of. And, I talked to you a week ago. I said, I was getting a little bit in that cuspice of depression, and, listening to one of the talks and just labeling it, I'm thinking bad, was helpful, and it kind of dissipated. Yesterday, for some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's the Super Bowl. I just started getting into that depression again. For some reason, it always happens on the weekend. And it was a lot harder to get out of it yesterday. It definitely affected like half of the day. And like, as I watch the Super Bowl and I see other people I know on some of the commercials that I went to school with and things like that. And, most of those guys who are playing are my age, in the Super Bowl, all that stuff. Not to say I missed out a career on football, because I wasn't that talented for it. But the point is, what eventually got me out of it was I had a rehearsal and I was present with other people, and I just took action, and I just did something. I acknowledged that I was feeling the way I was feeling, but I still went and did the action anyway. In the past, I would have skipped that rehearsal. I would have bailed out. I can't do it. I don't feel right, blah, blah, blah. But instead, I still felt the way I felt, and I still took it anyway, did the action, and was there. And after those 3 hours of rehearsal, I felt a lot better. I could move on and take whatever actions I needed to take the rest of the night, film an audition, whatever. But I don't know. I think what's interesting about that is, that's something that I'm physically dealing with yesterday and in the past. I think if I didn't know that my thoughts were just thoughts and I could detach from them, and rather I identified with them as who I am, I don't think it's possible to take action to get out of it.
Well, if it was impossible to get out of it, you wouldn't even try, because it would be the high point of your experience and existence, and you'd be feeling successful in all the failure you do. We know what's wrong because we know what's right. Feeling wrong and feeling doubt isn't a consequence of lacking anything other than the immediate thing we are impacted by in our feelings is our thinking. That's the most primary thing that's causing our environment. Our senses aren't telling us about the environment as an opinion. They're telling us it is an accurate assessment of it's freezing out. I make the decision to put a coat on. My senses don't say you're going to freeze to death if you sit out here. My thinking does. My senses just say, they give me the temperature, basically. My skin tells me, right? So there's a sense of knowing there. But, if we backtrack to where we started with the robber and think of the arc of the story you just explained, and Pedro brought this up yesterday, and we can bring balance to the imbalance. But the question of this conversation is, why is it that the imbalance always seems to be in the direction of trying to right wrong, and we're never arguing to wrong right? That doesn't seem to be the question most people ask. Most people
I don't understand that right, wrong, right. Can you explain, Jack, please?
Sure. Nobody comes to me and says, I need to feel wrong. I need to feel worse. I'm trying to feel worse. Everybody comes and says, I want to feel better. I don't feel good. I want to feel better. I want to feel better. We're relying on feeling as our source. And when we think we feel better, which we can feel, the exhilaration of denial can feel better for a moment. And we can think we've got things managed. But if we feel out of balance, why does it always seem to be that the balance is in the direction of wrong if we're not doing something that we don't think we're doing that's wrong? And this whole issue can be incredibly explosive, but it can also be as simple as you just mentioned when you started to see that your depression is simply a thought. And my sense is weighty thoughts that we're in conflict with create a weight we're not designed to bear, because we're not born in weight. We're born in freedom. And we almost float in terms of our being nature. The being nature of spirit is not held by gravity. It just is a presence.
Mm.
And if the basis of my work all the time is trying to overcome things, what I'm doing is admitting that I'm finally coming to the point I'm willing to look at what I'm doing. And if all I'm doing is trying to feel better about the worse I'm doing, I'm managing what's wrong in a better and better way. And the things I'm doing to feel better are actually they're actually maintaining the thing that's wrong. They're actually giving me the impression that I'm getting better at denying what I'm doing wrong. And we call it subconscious, and I don't think it's subconscious at all. I think it's very evident to us. We just dismiss it so that we can maintain the opinion that we're victims to it rather than responsible for it. And it isn't because I suspect we absolutely want to do that. My suspicion is we just don't know what else to do because it's been done so long and there's not a lot of evidence to provide options for that. And starting to say, wow, I must be doing something I don't even think I'm doing. And now you begin to see how deceptive our thinking can be by starting to hide things in the dark and think because we don't see them, they're not there. And that's child's play as an adult that kills people and kills other people and has people commit suicide and all that other stuff, thinking that they're just haunted by, they're just so wrong and so bad because they're constantly fighting and maintaining this wrong and bad rather than saying, oh, I just keep secrets that are obviously not secrets because they're acting on me in ways that give me the clear impression that something's wrong and haunting me. So they're clearly not secrets. There aren't any secrets. But I maintain lies. And when I do, I have consequences in how I feel. And when I think my feelings, we were talking about this last week, Pedro, where I think you used the term that reliance on feelings is dangerous. When I am thinking irrational thoughts, and my feelings feel bad, and I'm not connecting the two and seeing that the bad feeling is a consequence of irrationality because I'm acting bad, I'm entertaining thoughts that are bad and irrational, my body is saying something's wrong. That's why I feel bad. What would be wrong? What you're thinking doesn't apply in this universe, and any action you take is going to be harmful to you and everyone else. In the same win-win thing you were describing, Philip, it becomes a lose-lose. I lose, you lose. Everybody loses. There's no winner in that. Mm-hmm. And we really don't lose, but we lose human capacity and potential, and we lose human productivity, and that's a threat to humanity. Not just me and you. That's a threat to humanity. And we've been pretty good at expressing that on a global level. Why? I just don't think we've made a shift in our awareness of what we're actually doing when it comes to thought, and mental problems have been seen as a pariah and something not to mention. When people get a runny nose, they generally say they're sick, but when they have thoughts running on and on and on, they seldom say I'm mentally ill. And in fact, it's a mental illness. And this is not a medical prescription or diagnosis. But if it causes us to be ill at ease, there's clearly something sick about it. And to act as though it isn't is to once more try to bury it and pretend that we just want to go along with that crowd, Pedro, that's culturally fit and all the things they represent so they can maintain the story of who they are and where they're from and all those kind of things that distinguish them, when in fact those distinctions have been the same exact basis for every war that's ever been fought. Somebody's right and somebody else is wrong, and we're going to kill them because of it. That seems like a little bit contrary to what our instincts regarding fear would have us do, which is to do the thing that would save us, not kill us. And yet in addictive thinking, the things we do with that fear actually kill us. So it shows how this reversal works in our twisted thinking.
You know, it's interesting, and I was laughing, was before the pandemic, obviously there's a general glorification of the ego and drive and, getting out there. And at least in Americana, there's definitely this like hustling, just pull your bootstraps and do hard work or outsmart the other person and da-da-da. But with the pandemic, how it's interesting how much mental health came more into focus because people couldn't get out of their house and drive somewhere and go do work or go to work. And they had to rather sit at home with themselves and with their thoughts.
So what do you think weekends are for you?
Well, obviously that sometimes.
How about this last weekend? Yeah,
it makes sense.
We are obsessed with productivity and work and yet do things that are destructive. So that really isn't the ultimate goal of productivity. But we, as a culture, are addicted to work. There's a big, large workaholism in our culture, which is what? A distraction. I feel better when I'm doing something that isn't focused on the thing that's wrong. So I feel better. But if I'm not treating what's wrong, it's like putting a salve on a rash on my face, and I need to constantly have a salve on my face. What's the difference? I might as well have the rash. Why not find out why I've got a rash and put it to rest and be done with it? And I'm not suggesting this is an easy approach, but what I am suggesting is that it's much harder not to approach it. And to approach it the first time for me gave me a panic attack. My whole body, when I finally got it and it's sort of clicked, my whole body turned gray. I lost the blood. It looked like the blood had drained out of my body. And that fear, though, dissipated because I'd been holding it so long, thinking I could protect myself and others from it, when in fact I was deteriorating my own and depreciating my own value and my own natural state of being by making believe it was up to me as a human to counter what I was doing rather than begin to notice my body's designed to tell me what's wrong so I can do things right. It's not designed to tell me what's right so I can do things wrong. When I'm doing them right, I don't argue with that. I only tend to argue with what's wrong because I think it gives an impression or an appearance that something's wrong. That's ego worried about appearance. That's not me as a substantive, absolute being in nature. That's ego. That's what I think about myself that's afraid of what people think and how I appear.
Yeah, what I was talking about earlier is like, me saying what I said and then you saying, oh, wasn't that correlated to the other? It's like we need other people in order to see what's at play.
That's why they're here.
That's why they're here.
And there's 7.5 billion plus now. So there's less to get away from. We have less room to pretend that we can do it alone and that we are alone. We're distinct. There's more people roaming the planet now. It almost demands we get better at our potential rather than continuing to maintain things that allowed people, maintain wrong ideas that allowed people to act as though they were distinct and separate and better or worse than the whole. That period is past. We're in a new era, and it's today and it's now. And there are more people than have ever been on this. No matter how much wrong we've done, we have more people here than have ever been here before. And it sort of ups the game a little bit to say, there's a lot less room to do wrong. So we might as well look at what we're doing that's wrong so we can start acting right and start actually we have that potential. We absolutely, not only do we have the potential, it's not even a question. The only question is, why do we continue to use old thoughts and old ideas and things that aren't true as the basis for our next move? And I would say talking about it as a disease is central to all addictions, compulsions, impulsive behaviors, and reactive behaviors. Things that we do automatically to defend ourselves are all consequences of this sense of defense we need to maintain, which is why people talk about being caught off guard by situations, because they're normally on guard. And that would include me. I'm not separate from that. I don't talk about this because I don't do it. I talk about it because I want to get better at thinking about it so I can speak about it more accurately. That's all. And I witness in all of everybody I talk to, people have those moments where they say things way beyond what I'm thinking and reveal that they have a sense of knowing that is well beyond what most of us think is even possible. And certainly within obsessive thoughts is thought impossible, absolutely impossible, because an obsessive thought thinks possibility is impossible because it's twisted and backward. Just like the idea that the burglar thinks he's doing good because he got away, when in fact he's just building up currency of wrong that's building and building and building. And he's going to eventually act on that and do something completely stupid and end up in prison.
Yeah, or dead.
Yeah, what exactly? I mean, the two are sort of synonymous. They're dead ends. They're dead ends. We're on a dead end road, and we think because we don't think we see the dead end that it's not going to eventually occur. You know, and I have never found when I drive, if I go down where it says no outlet or dead end, I've ever been able to get through. So even street signs tell us this, and yet we miss it in our own conversation and our own introspective inner conversation. Considering these absolute principles is beginning to see that that is in fact our nature, no matter what we think. And if all we're doing is trying to bring balance to imbalance, all we're doing is trying to deny the imbalance that we're creating, when in fact there's no imbalance or possibility of imbalance in an absolute natural source ever. There's no imbalance in it because there's no change in it. It's something that is, it's all knowing. It defies any kind of concept that would limit it. And any thinking I do about it is never adequate enough to explain it. But the fact that I can't is the acknowledgement of it. It isn't trying to be better at explaining it. It's the surrender and saying, whatever it is, and as it is, I am. And that's our source too. We are as it is, we are. Simple. There's no argument in that. Yet we can make arguments over it. And generally, I would suggest they're attached to addictive thoughts that we've been harboring for so long. We think our life depends on maintaining them because the life we're thinking of is the life born of thought, which is ego. What I think about myself, when thinking thinks about itself, it thinks of a self born of thought. And who does that become? Who I think I am. And who I need to protect. Why do I need to protect something if it's absolute in nature? I don't. There's no protection needed or defense needed in an absolute source. It's not at risk. It's only this idea of who I think I am that's at risk. Why? Because I know it's at risk, because I know it has no basis. I know it's vulnerable because it doesn't have any strength. I know that it doesn't even exist, and I'm making believe it's there. And I'm sick and tired of continuing to do what you said earlier, Philip, maintain those thoughts that are just going around and around and around and around and around, and around, trying to maintain it because I'm saying, well, if I think about it all the time, it must be real. It isn't. The only thing that becomes real is the evidence of pain, and pain is not a sign of reality. It's a sign of something wrong. We're designed to know what's wrong in our environment as humans.
So,
I have a question for you, but maybe you don't want to answer, and that is fine. But do you have an idea of what is the source of your sadness, your depression?
My sense is I had, when I looked back and began to detach from all the excuses I used, I always, very young, I was born in Detroit. I remember looking out the window at kids in the neighborhood who were rebuilding cars in the late 50s. And something just seemed wrong. I couldn't, it was almost as though I wondered if I'd gotten off the train at the wrong stop. And I was too young to even know what a train was, but my mom had taken me to the train station and I had that image in my head. And I loved the train station. I love trains and all that. So my sense is that it's an accurate assessment. And I would be maybe bold to suggest that we've all been aware of it. But I suspect if we have, it's been evident to us while we've been trying to figure out how to overcome it most of our lives, because we looked and saw parents that were struggling and trying to put on airs that they knew what they were doing, and yet they ended up being seen as vulnerable, because there's no greater witness to a parent's vulnerability than kids that are with them 24 hours a day and get to see every one of the failings and every one of the potential misdeeds that are done on the way to trying to simply survive and give the kids what are needed. And so witnessing that, I don't know exactly, Santiago. It's just something that became clear to me as I got older, that I had attached it to all sorts of reasons. And when the reasons melted away, I just began to say, if I'm looking at something disturbing, I was disturbed. And I recognized it extremely young. And my sense is everybody does. And in a sense, we're a little awkward about admitting it because it seems so preposterous to look at a world that seems to have figured itself out in so many different ways. And yet if those ways are dysfunctional and based on this same mode of mistaken thinking, going along with it becomes the new form of insanity. And insanity is really just being reasonable. That's about all that it amounts to, is starting to use reason properly rather than unreasonably and irresponsibly.
Okay, we are Philip, do you have an idea the source of your depression?
Yeah, I do.
Do you want to share, or is private?
Are you asking me to share?
No, I am just asking if it's private or you want to keep it.
Yeah, for me, I'm happy to share the specific generalities of it, which is just like, I think for me in childhood, there were certain narratives that were ingrained past. For me, there's a narrative of I'll never get what I want. I'll always have a taste. I'll always get close, but I won't have what I want. For whatever reasons it was, like I was overweight as a kid, or my parents hit me, or whatever the stuff is. It's usually can be boiled down to some narrative of I won't have what I want, no matter how much I work at it, and in some way I will self-destruct, or I will mess something up in some detail. And for me, when I look at that, I look at it twofold. One, it's just a story, and two, that story has anchors in my nervous system, like thoughts that have anchored into my nervous system. And part of me, maybe it's a little bit different than Jack, is like I do EMDR therapy. So for me, dealing with PTSD, it's about rearranging my relationship to those things and dissipating those things in my nervous system that are false. Because for me, I totally see it as a story. I see it as maybe past experiences that feed into that story. But nevertheless, in this moment, I'm completely free. However, I'm not free when I'm bringing those stories into right now, or I'm not using those stories to dissipate something that's going to allow me to be more free, or I'm not getting the information. I'm not or I'm not learning from those past mistakes, so I don't have to create them in the future. So I don't know. For me, that depression sometimes is just a physical indication that that story is active, and there's something to learn from it. It may feel like a lot. It may be, I have thoughts that are very uncomfortable to have. However, usually if I get through it all, it will help me have some bit of information that's going to help me be more free moving forward in the present moment and in my future.
Let me ask you something, Philip. In your life, did you get things that you wanted, or you never get what you want, or sometimes you did get what you want?
I think sometimes I did get what I wanted, and sometimes I didn't.
And what happened, and how it feel when you got what you want?
When I felt what I got, what I want, what's the title of that movie? The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Yeah. I would feel that lightness, and I'd feel happy. But at the same time, if it was just a material thing or something that was superficial, eventually that would dissipate, and my brain would want something else, or would want and turn that into a thought that it was actually a need.
Yeah, well, I relate very much to what you said, Phil, because I was not overweight, like you mentioned, but I have other anchors, other reasons to consider myself a loser, and to have the same thoughts. I will never be where I want to be. I am not good enough. I will be a failure, etc., etc. And my experience is that is something that is pretty fake, because I have accomplished many things in my life that in the eyes of others could be, oh my God, look at what this guy has accomplished. But it never felt that I arrived there, because I was holding to the very old idea that I am a loser, that I am wrong, that I am made in the wrong way. So the source of my depression, and thanks God, I think I am done with that. That doesn't mean cannot come back tomorrow, because if I grab the same fake ideas, I will go into that rabbit hole again. But the source of my depression was that core feeling that I am not good enough. And it's a lot of thoughts and feelings in a daily or weekly basis that come talking about that. And I have a choice, either to know what is the lie behind that thought, or believe the thought, believe the feeling. That's, in that sense, is where I was saying the other day, Jack,
Yes.
that feelings are not, that feelings and thoughts are not that important.
Here's
and that
the
we are
danger.
taking them.
I think what you had said, Pedro, was that they were dangerous. Relying on feelings was dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let me point out something to you, because we're really resting right on the pinnacle of this whole thing, and I've got a clearer understanding of your question when you initially asked me that I'm not sure I quite answered. If Feeling is feeling what we're thinking. And we're thinking things as you're describing, both of you and myself. If we're feeling things that are untrue, we're bound to feel empty. We're bound to feel less than. We're bound to feel needing of something else because we're not admitting the feeling for what it is, which is reflecting our thoughts. And when you felt detached, Philip, from beginning to see that depression is simply a thought, rather than try to identify why the thought's there, just know that it's a lie of some sort. You don't even need to know what the lie is. And if you look any further, you get into the booby trap of thinking it's up to you to figure it out when your body's already told you what's wrong. It's already said something's wrong. It's all you need to know. And if you allow that to be your experience because you're experiencing it and don't put yourself into opposition because you don't like feeling it, it will dissipate as quickly as you begin to acknowledge it rather than maintain it in this darkness that we start to create and manage, which we then deny we're doing to make believe we're getting better because we're treating the symptom again to feel better rather than starting to recognize we're just burying another thought that's making us feel wrong and out of place. If we can't admit or don't admit that we are always exactly where we are with everything we have right now, always, always, always. If you ever wonder where you are and what you have, it is exactly where you are. Nothing more or less, ever. If we don't admit that, how are we ever going to find another place that's going to be fulfilled if we can't have it where it is? When we go looking for it where it isn't, there's no possibility that will ever resolve. And the addiction is really treating now the symptom of feeling rather than recognizing that feeling is actually a perfect, accurate assessment of our thinking. And when my thinking's irrational, my feelings feel bad. It's not about me. It's about what I'm doing with thought. It doesn't reflect on who I am, except the who I think I am as a result of thinking thought is who I am. When I start thinking that I'm bad and I'm less than, as you both described, and I felt growing up, and when I talked about it, I was talking about it being well past the bubble rather than the time I thought that I was a victim to all people and all things and thought that they were doing it to me and I had no part in the doing of it. That's what I was depressed about. I wasn't expressing my nature, my responsibility. My absolute nature is responsible, not something that I take and give and am responsible only when I'm acting responsible. I am free enough, and the freedom, Philip, never comes and goes. Our experience of it comes and goes with the imposition of thoughts that we create that give us the impression that we're condemned because we know we're committed to maintaining them. And what we're condemned by is our own unadmission of what we're doing to continue to maintain those thoughts. That's that blindness. And again, we're at that point to look at it's what we think we're not thinking that really plagues us. And when we're too young to even know what we're thinking for the most part, and we're acting on those, we're developing thoughts, not recognizing how capable we are of denying thoughts and pretending, but when they're in the dark, they're not there. We start acting on that stuff as adults and never unravel that and say, oh, I have a whole element that I'm capable of hiding and pretending is hidden when in fact, blood, sweat, and tears are revealing it through my body. I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I'm edgy, I'm reactive to people, I'm defensive, I need more all the time. I'm expressing it, and that's my admission. And what do I do with that? Try to pretend it's not happening and look better and buy a new car and get all kinds of other stuff and mask it. And that's why Santiago, in experience, no matter how far we go, it's never enough because we're trying to fill a void with more of a void. We're relying on the thinking we're doing to creates the feeling and thinks that the idea is best served by continuing to do it, just like an alcoholic thinks the only thing they're interested in is the next drink because this one's almost gone. Where's the next one's coming from? Same with the drug addict. It's the next hit they're worried about, not the present one.
The good thing about all of this becoming very practical is that truly picking up that thought or that feeling that tells me that I am a loser, and etc., 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 in any of the forms that any permutation, any of the different variations that this thing takes, grabbing that thought and indulging that thought of feeling, it costs the same that going the reverse and grabbing the thought that everything is okay, that there is an intelligence in the universe, that I am part of that intelligence, and that the blue is a beautiful blue. So it costs the same amount of money. The difference is to waste my precious life in this planet in going into the rabbit hole that never ends, because I will never be able to prove that I am good enough.
Yes.
Or just disconnect from that and look at how beautiful the blue is.
So I'm going to give you a suggestion, and this will be a lead in. I know that you have a time constraint today, Pedro, and I'm going to leave you with a suggestion to think about during the week, and something we can discuss for whatever time you have left. And then Philip and I will continue a little bit on it. The idea here isn't discontinuing doing what we do wrong. It's starting to see that if we're choosing to do it and we're responsible for doing it, once we begin to see that we're doing it for a purpose that may be irrational and unreasonable, but we're choosing it because we want to, and start to see that we've been using it all along to continue to maintain the stories we tell, to excuse ourselves from the possibility of it having anything to do with us, while it seems to be everybody else that's doing it, is starting to embrace it and say, look, this is something I can do, just as you just described, Pedro. This is something I can do at any moment. Any moment. And I am capable of doing something wrong and thinking it's right at any moment. And that's the place of neutrality that's described in the big book that we get to in relation to alcohol and drugs. It isn't because we can't ever do it again. It's because we begin to see we can do it whenever we want. But when we have the freedom to look at it accurately, it starts to become a little less logical to do something that's completely illogical, that we know hasn't ever worked ever again. It just becomes natural to say, oh, I can do that, but I have no interest in doing that. I've done that 9 million times and it's never worked. I have no interest in diving back into that. The freedom comes in the admission that it's possible rather than something we can't ever do again. As long as there's a fight involved, it's going to create a compelling urge to prove the fight can be won. So that's the exercise. And I will suggest that you will notice quicker when you're wrong, and you will notice quicker that you do not need to take it any further than it is, and just let it be. And you'll struggle a little bit maybe with the ideas that I held for so long, that I needed to figure out the source of where it came from, rather than beginning to concede the only source there is in the present, and where it's coming from is what I'm doing right now. And if I continue doing what I'm doing right now and it's wrong, thinking I'm right, I'm going to recreate the whole thing all over again. Rather than just saying, oh, I have no obligation to continue this ever. I've never had any obligation to continue to do what I was doing compulsively or obsessively, ever. Freedom was always there. I just chose condemnation. I chose my own self-centered thoughts. I chose to misuse my thinking and create an abnormal experience. And abuse, abnormal use is abuse. And the abuse I suffered was not from all the stories I told, Pedro, as a youth. And my breakout from all that depression was realizing that I had used everything and everyone, and will continue to, as long as I maintain ideas that are absolutely absurd and insane. I'm going to immediately turn to everyone else to excuse it. And in any way I do it, I act as though I'm not. And how do I know?
What you are saying, Jack, I understand what you are saying, but I hear it in a way that has tremendous amount of self-loathing, I am the guilty one. I am the one that choose to do this.
Yes.
I see it in
Yes.
a different.
Nobody comes
I see
to
it.
me and say,
Let me finish, please.
nobody comes to me and says, I'm struggling with innocence.
Let me finish, please. I rather put it in a different way. That is, I didn't know better, and
Yes,
now
you
I
did.
know.
You did.
And now I know.
You knew better all along. You just didn't act better.
How
And
do you
that's,
think
there's
that
no,
at 6 years old, when Philip mentioned that those traumas or those things are in his nervous system, how do you think at 6 years old you are guilty of perceiving as make it home? You are not guilty of that. It just happened.
okay.
And
I'm
part
not
of
going
the
to go back. I'm not going to go
and
back
part
to
of the
6 years old.
liberation.
I'm not going to go back to
No,
6 years
no.
old.
Let me
All
finish.
6 years
Please,
old
let me
is
finish.
right now,
Please, let me
Pedro,
finish.
is a
Please, let me finish.
conversation.
Please, let me finish. I think part of the spiritual awakening or the liberation is first to visit hell. And I have been there, and I know why I was there, and I am not there anymore. So why to blame myself because I visit hell? It was part of the experience.
It isn't blame to be responsible. It isn't fault to be responsible. It's freedom. And we're not talking about 6-year-olds here. We're talking about adults maintaining ideas that were developed at 6 years old and thinking the 6 years old, we're trying to look for innocence in what we did. What we did back then, we're guilty for having done. Doesn't matter whether it was right or wrong. It's the culmination of everything that's right now happening. That 6-year-old kid and what it did is absolutely present with us now to any degree that it had any real impact on everything that's happening right now. And that's really what we're focusing on. The innocence, nobody comes to me and says, I'd rather feel more guilty. People come and say, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed. Why would that be if we were reflecting the innocence of our nature? It wouldn't. We know better by having those feelings, and we have all along, we just haven't acted better. And
I was feeling guilty and ashamed at 6 years old.
Yes, exactly. So that clearly is an indication you knew better because you weren't feeling innocent. There's a clear indication that this is built into our system, that we are much better than we admit. We've created stories to justify why kids can't be better than they are when they've been impacted by the thinking that preceded them that was also diseased and sick.
So Jack, guys, let me share something because I think I can find the middle ground. Which to me, look, I don't 100% agree that I knew how to be responsible when I was 6 years old for this, that, and the other. However, what I would say, and this is kind of why I brought, like, there's things that I think we always are born with the truth and we know the truth. At some point, we get impressed by the adults around us, society, culture, whatever it is, Catholicism. That's where a lot of that blame seems to, in my opinion, if I were to guess, Pedro, would be coming from, because I grew up Catholic and there's an inherent self-blame and chastising. However, what I would say is that since I've been conscious, since I've, for me, it was probably 20 years old when I got sober. I am responsible to deal with what occurred in the past, and to allow myself to live happy, joyous, and free so I can help other people. And I don't blame myself for what occurred in my childhood, but I do take responsibility for carrying the stories from my childhood still.
Exactly.
And
I think the blame for me, sometimes if I blame myself, I blame myself for still having those stories come up and still have a hold on me, dreams are funny, but I had a dream or something with people from high school, and I woke up this morning and I just remembered, oh, I know what that dream means to me. It means in some way I still haven't forgiven those people because they still have a hold on how I dictate and go about my life in some way in my perception. Whether it's like fighting against or whatever it is. So the only antidote for that for me is to forgive them and absolve them of whatever it is that my stories or in my body still triggers stories that occurred, and to try to move forward and let go of that. And once it dissipates, it starts to fall off of my perception. But I think for me, having done a lot of therapy and EMDR stuff and PTSD stuff, I think there's a duality, a line that needs to be walked of, yes, things occurred. There's things that I didn't know better. I wasn't necessarily responsible. There were people around me who were more conscious or could have been more conscious than me. However, they're probably the reason I felt bad. And this is going back to Jack. The reason I felt bad is because some part of me knew whatever was occurring was wrong, but maybe I wasn't big enough, or I had the tools and maturity enough to stand up for myself back then, which as a child, you're not supposed to have. So I forgive myself for being a child. At the same time, land in the same point I made before. It's like today as an adult, I have the responsibility to still not blame what's occurring today on my childhood, but I can be responsible for my childhood.
As an adult, you have the responsibility not to behave as a child. Yes.
Yes, very good. And listen, we don't feel guilty because we don't know better, because feeling guilt is an admission of responsibility. That's why we feel guilty. It's not, we think of this guilty as some horrible thing. It's literally a factual admission that we're responsible. That's what guilty is. And ashamed is we're ashamed of continuing to do these things. There's no greater harm done by any outside individual that we see sometimes that we're not doing to ourselves 24 hours, 7 days a week when we're maintaining these ideas. There's no greater enemy in our fort. We've built a fort of defense with the enemy inside rather than outside. And to the degree that we maintain those ideas, we are going to feel those feelings. And to think we should not be feeling those feelings, or somehow the feelings condemn us, is to think of the feeling as having a life of their own rather than one that we've actually caused and created. And again, it's a misuse and a misunderstanding of what's actually happening. And when we're seeing things and hearing things that aren't happening, it's a pretty good definition of being insane. And so the stories we tell that we use to excuse ourselves aren't even happening, except to our insistence that we tell them to try to find traction, when in fact they're just distractions, meaning they have no traction at all, nothing, other than the repetitive, chronic nature of our own willingness to continue to maintain them. And my question to you both today would be, for the next week, to think about it. Either we're responsible or we're not responsible, period. Because responsibility can't be part-time, just like an absolute nature cannot be part-time. So either we are built into a form that's responsible for whatever happens, regardless of whether we're young and know better and all that kind of stuff. We can use all the excuses we want. We were shaped by the things that were wrong largely, not necessarily the things that were right. We were formed by the things that were right, but the personalities we developed and the ideas we have and the pains that we suffer from were shaped by the way we dealt with how things happened. And that's a present issue. Doesn't have to do, our childhood is here presently with us in whatever way it impacted us and everyone else. Everything that's ever happened is here right now. It's a culmination. The moment is the culmination on Earth in this universe of everything that's ever happened anywhere that's ever happened, period, with anybody and anything. We are witnesses of it. We are present in its nature as it is our nature. And our ability to function is to get out of the stories and the excuses and the lengthy ideas we have about things that aren't happening and start to just simply witness. We create our experience in the present, always have, always will. It's a choice we were free to make, and the ones we made freely, regardless of how bad they were or the impact they had or still have. Either we're responsible or we're irresponsible. And I would suggest if we're irresponsible by nature, then we would relish and value and feel great esteem and never feel low self-worth by doing the irresponsible thing and acting the irresponsible way and entertaining the irresponsible thoughts. We would be fulfilled because we would be fulfilling our nature. And I have never had anybody come to me again and ask to feel worse, or they're suffering from too much innocence. They know what's been going on, and they've known it. As far as I'm concerned, I knew it the whole time. I just didn't want to admit it. And my mother used to say to me when I was in single digits, "You know better." And she was right. She could see on my face I was up to something. And if I was clever enough
Let me paraphrase your mother, Jack. You're still knowing better.
Excuse me?
Let me paraphrase your mom by saying, Jack, you know better.
Yes.
Even today.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Very good. And the better I know is not the worse, is the better I know has no worse in it. It has no wrong in it. It has no condemnation in it. It has no contempt in it. It has no bitterness or fight in it. It's a neutrality that allows for the freedom to choose anything I want to do. And my system, like our systems, are perfectly designed to let us know when we're off course. And when I act as though I'm on course, when I'm off course, I'm bound to get someplace I think I don't want to be, when in fact I'm getting exactly where I'm destined to be, given the choice of direction I've taken or misdirection that I've engaged in. So it's not a calamity. It's not a coincidence, as we call it, and we misuse the word because a coincidence is really a coincidence. And if everything is interacting with everything now, and we're interacting with everything, it is all coinciding right now. It's not a curse. It's not something that I'm faulted or blamed for. It's just how it is. How things are is how they are. And how I think of them is distinct from how they are when I start thinking in ways that are specific to my thinking, rather than allowing those things to have whatever they are, be what they are, and start to realize that they've always been that way. And it's always been my thinking that gave me the impression that they weren't.
Well, I can give, maybe this is a good way to kind of outro it a little bit. I can give you one example in my life where when I accepted what is, things actually got better. Was when I was about 17 or 18, I was overweight. I was 260 pounds. I ended up losing about 80 pounds. And the moment was when I was on stage with my teacher in San Francisco, who's Dan Glover's teacher. And I remember just having this moment where it was like, look, if, I guess she had told my mom somehow that I should think about losing weight because I'll probably work more as an actor, which is probably not true now because, I mean, look at Jonah Hill. But the point is, there was a moment when I was on stage where I realized, look, if I'm meant to be fat, I'm going to be fat. If I'm not, I'm not. I just accept how I am. And slowly over the next, I'd say 3 months, I lost about 40 to 50 pounds. And then over the next year, I lost the last 30, around 30-ish pounds. And it didn't really take a lot of effort. It was easy to go to the gym and do cardio. It was easy to eat less after that moment. It was almost like some kind of grace came into me. But I think a part of it was just, I accepted what is. And I said, if this is meant to be, it's meant to be. I'm not going to fight it anymore, rather than fighting the fact that I'm overweight, when in reality, I actually was overweight,
Grace is our ever-present state. And when we think it comes back into us, again, we're using thinking to think we can force it out of us, right? So what you're describing, Philip, is conceding that things were how they were and you were going to do something about them, rather than thinking they're not how they are and I'm going to try to fix them. So when you just deal with what's happening, it becomes very easy. It's very obvious. That sense of intuition on a human level knows exactly what to do. You want to lose weight? Don't eat as many calories. Start exercising. Start doing things. You want to think that it's not that and it's something else and then try to fix it? You're just creating your own impossibility. The grace is always there. And to a spirit that's infinite, it isn't even grace. We've named it this thing that seems so rare and unusual because we've been so unwilling to accept that it's our normal state of being wherever we've been. Everything's always been doing what it's been doing while we've been thinking of it only in terms of what we're thinking. So that it doesn't come and go. It's always there. You're witnessing as I allow things to be as they are, all of a sudden I sense freedom as a human. It isn't because freedom's all of a sudden there. It's because I'm finally paying attention to what's actually happening. It starts to allow me that awareness. And I can act happy, joyous, and free and be doing it to avoid the unhappiness and lack of joy and sense of condemnation I'm actually still feeling for things that I don't think I'm thinking. And to any degree that I try to mask that, I'm basically asking for a moment in the future to explode. And I'm wondering why I feel like the future is doomed. It's no wonder. I just use the whole story to make believe I don't know what's happening while I'm absolutely dead center of the tracks I'm putting the future on in terms of predicting these things because I know where I'm going. I wouldn't feel the future is doomed if I knew I was doing things that were not doomed. It wouldn't be that way. So this has been very good. And it's challenging to communicate this. And I would not say I'm very good at it. And I can be very insistent about it because I want to get it out when I feel like I'm on a train of thought that's important. But it's also very dismissive of me to do that of what other people are thinking and saying at the same time. And I recognize that. And I re-listen to these and realize how many times I kind of cringe and hold my breath a little bit. And yet I realize that by looking at that stuff, I start to remember that that's how I acted as a child and haven't grown up around fully and away from. Very much some of those same things that I felt when I was very young, because I really haven't matured in many ways. And yet I don't want to continue to do those things. And one of the things that became obvious to me in this whole process is I began to see that everything's always been the way it was. I can pick it and I can talk about it in bits and pieces and think because I got over this and I got over that I'm over it all. But when I saw that it was doing it all in a way that had me sense I was a victim, I began to actually have a sense of freedom that transcended most of those things, but it also revealed that there was a lot there that I didn't think I was doing, and that small stuff became more paramount and more obvious to me. And it also became clear, and this went back to one of your points, Pedro, that when I started looking at things that were disturbing, I realized that I was psychopathic not to be disturbed at what I was looking at, and started seeing that this idea of an awakening, a spiritual awakening, and an awakening to a present state that I've always been in, doesn't dismiss what's wrong. It starts to not only allow me to see what I'm doing is wrong, but to see what's wrong that we're all doing, not in ways that I'm contemptful of or scornful of, but in ways I begin to embrace that I'm responsible for if I'm any part of it at all. And to speak in those terms gives us a chance as humans to begin to start acting in terms that would act according to that awareness, rather than pretend nothing's happening that's wrong because I'm now free and I'm doing yoga more and more and feel great while the world is doing what it's doing. And I think I don't have any part of it. And I'm blissful because how can I be blissful in the face of seeing some of the things that are happening in our planet that I know I'm intimately connected to? I don't know how to do that yet. And I'm not sure that a new form of denial at a spiritual level would be my goal. but to actually look at things on a level that actually confronts them accurately and potentially dispels those things, just like I've been able to dispel, take the words apart that I used to justify the stories that I told, to justify the excuses that I wanted to make, to say that I had nothing to do with it all. And there's freedom in that. And there's a bit of a gut wrench to it also. So to talk about it openly and to talk about with you gentlemen and to grow with you as I do is to begin to participate at a level that I sense is valuable, certainly valuable to me because I learn every day. And I suspect that everybody around me who's interested is doing the same thing. And I suspect that everybody who's uninterested is learning, but they don't see what they're learning yet. They may not be seeing it, but they're learning, and it's there. And it's just a matter of time before they might look. To think that because I don't look at something, it isn't happening is a pretty juvenile approach to awareness. So I appreciate this greatly.
Likewise, Jack. We're all learning and growing, and we have different roles in different people's lives, and adjusting to those roles can be, take some time. But so I appreciate what you said. I mean, I've known you for so long, and, I'm always grateful for your attention to detail. And I understand sometimes your style of going about things. For me, I never take that personal. But at the same time, I think that's also because I'm very comfortable in my own point of view and experience of things to come back with whatever my view or reaction is. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Well, Philip, you've been as dogged as most anyone I've ever worked with, and you being so young when you got sober, I think gave you a bit of insight that many would have thought impossible, 50 years ago or 60 years ago. And in that same way that we think today things are impossible, it's only based on what we've done rather than what we're capable of doing. And if we're capable of doing everything right and starting to really function on a level, if we can do things wrong as well as we've done them, we can certainly start doing things right because it's more natural and would become something we wouldn't even have to think about. And the bounty of it would become so obvious that all the things we think about today that we need more would vanish in the having of things as they are, rather than the imagination that somehow we're going to get them right by having them as they are not. And really put to rest that sort of chronic, habitual conflict that humans have seemed to, I don't know, just a guess on my part. I wasn't there through the whole history as far as I can tell, but it seems to me history tells a pretty similar story to what we're experiencing today that's becoming a little more obvious because things seem to be a little wrong. And this 2-year timeout that everybody's had seems to have opened some ears up because a lot of the distractions that used to be available all of a sudden disappeared and people started looking at what was happening, and what was happening was not very happy in a lot of cases. And yet the looking at it accurately is the production of happiness, because happiness is a form of contentedness, and content is substance. It's seeing things as they are rather than we imagine them to be, rather than as they appear to be, rather than as we hope they might be or should be. It's really starting to see they've always been the way they are, no matter what I thought or think. So why do I spend so much time thinking about them and thinking that my thinking is going to impact them in some way to have them as they're not? It's like it becomes silly and laughable compared to something I might want to shoot myself over.
Well, I think the reason is it's reflected and mirrored in society and cultures and other people who there is a different mode of life for people who are playing that game of the capitalists, white collar type of profession of how things operate. And I think
all doing it though. We're all
doing it. And I think the thing is, it's been habitualized. So for us to see it, we have to be in enough pain where that game and those rules don't really work.
No, we don't. You know where we can see it? Right now. You know why? Because it's exactly what's happening right here and now. The chronic nature of these stories we tell about what we need to do to get there when we've always been there. We're there now. We can't be anywhere else. There's nowhere else to be for anyone or anything right now. And we're with everything and everyone right now, here. Always have been. And we talk about not being in the present because we think being obsessed with thoughts takes us from the present, which once again shows us how much credit we give thinking and how little credit we give to reality and truth. And how quick we are to conclude that our thinking is the source when it's our thinking about our thinking that's the problem. Interesting. So it's just practice. It's just practice and beginning to literally dispel. Think of what dispelling is. It's literally taking the words apart. It's not misspelling, it's dispelling. It's letting the words just trickle away and recognize that in the silence and peace is a knowing presence that we've always known and always been at ease with, and been the only things in thinking to clutter that thing up. And if it was somebody else who did something, it was our thinking about what they did that was the greatest impact on our experience. Nothing more, nothing less. And it never lasted any more than we continue to maintain it. Because the moment's new, it's always free, it's always free, it's always free, it's always free, it's always bountiful, it's always all that is, always. And what we make of it isn't what it is, it's what we make. And that's why we refer to our makeup. It's made up. And if it's made up, we can just blow into the air and watch the smoke dissipate. Because that's all it is, a lot of hot air that we're spewing. It's not much more. So that's the point of the discussion ultimately. And it doesn't take quickly, in my experience, because of the habituation and because of the routines and because of that sort of stuff we've done so many times. But as you begin to notice these things on an accurate basis, you'll start seeing in the middle sentence, you're saying, why am I even saying this? Why am I even repeating this? Where am I even going with this? Because it's just another mantra that's looking for a place to fill the silence and to feel credit for, rather than say, this has no place. It never has. It's been my own thinking about it. That's been my own repetition of it and my own feeling of it. Nothing more. That's freedom. And that freedom is ever present, ever present, wherever we are, wherever everything is. There is no other place that anything has ever been but in the present. Never, ever. And nor will it ever be. There is no past or future that isn't simply held in thought. And where is the thought held? In the present. Always. It's the only place thoughts happen. There is no place to go to get. There is nothing to get when we go anywhere we think we need to, because it's all here now, already.
Okay, well, last week I didn't have a question for this week, but this week I have a question for the next one.
Yes,
May
sir.
I ask you the question?
Yeah, please.
So I would like to talk in the next meeting on how our lives as a society have impact all of us, each of us, and the world in general, because this country is the leading country in the world, and therefore whatever we do here impacts other people. So that's what I would like to talk, how our lives have impact each of us and the world.
Okay. How do our lives impact each of us and the world in general? That's what I have.
Yeah.
Okay, Philip, any thoughts?
I mean, all the questions are the same. Just like a different variation of it. I guess what I'm gathering is how it's the same thing for me. It's just like how and what to practice when you notice the stories, and how to get back to the present, at the present moment where all that is and everything is fine. I guess I'm more curious about that. And I'm going to ask myself what practices I do during the week when I notice that situation occur.
So I'm going to give you both something to think about in both of these questions, just to consider.
Mhm.
Even in the idea that it's the world and not us, we're considering what's wrong out there rather than seeing it as an absolute reflection of what we do. If we are based on an absolute premise, what we do wrong is no different between us. We just have different names and places and times attached to what we've done wrong. So that's one point. And in yours, Philip, you're still asking, how do I get back? You're asking, how do I get back to a place I can't even leave? Why wouldn't you be in a quandary over that? Why wouldn't that send you off on a wild goose chase of chasing thoughts to try to figure that out? If you're in a place that you can't leave, how can you get back to it? How can that place that can't be found be lost, or can't be lost be found? It's where we are. If it's where we are and all we are, and it's literally the sum total of our existence, then all of these other thoughts are fractured ideas about the fact that we're not where we are and don't have what we have as a result. And if we maintain that idea, we're going to be chasing our tails, thinking someday we'll catch it. And even if you've seen a dog catch its tail, they let go so they can start chasing it again. They never gnaw on it very long. So there's the question. Why would we ask a question to do what's impossible and then wonder why life seems impossible? But at the same time, there's a lot of humanity attached to these questions and a lot of fractured states of thinking that are attached to these questions. And it's worth looking at in all those variety of ways to start seeing that that variety isn't that, it doesn't have as great a variety as it seems. They're all based in contempt, and they're all based in a self-centered fear, and they're all based in a blame and a shame and a guilt that we're aware of, all of them. So I love you guys, and I really appreciate that we have come together as long as we have and do what we do and grow. And I'm always challenged, and I always go back through everything I do, being sensitive, which I suspect most humans that are interested in being aware are, and most humans who are not interested in being aware are probably even more sensitive because they're trying to cover up how sensitive they are because they don't know what to do with the sensitivity. But sensitivity is awareness. And awareness is actually a benefit. It's not a plague. It's something we were given so that we could experience the fullness and the richness of a human experience that's based in something, as Pedro described, that blue, when you look at the sky, is just an incredible color blue. And it's very unusual in the entire universe that we even have an atmosphere that looks blue from outer space. And the fact that we can appreciate those things shows how quickly we can depreciate them too, and think that there's nothing there, and we're so busy looking at the ground and trying to figure our seeming life out when the life we're trying to figure out is of something that doesn't even exist, but only what we think it is. It's pretty crazy. And yet that bounty is there, that abundance is there. The idea that it would be impossible for the world to start recognizing what it's done wrong, if you look back through history, major transitions of thought have occurred when people started looking at things accurately, and nobody had to argue over it. Nobody had to fight over it. It just simultaneously started to connect because people realized they could utilize it and function better as a result of it and start operating in a way that was more beneficial. This is not a secret. It's gone on through history. We do not need to postpone it any longer, and there is no postponement. It's all present. It's what we do with the present that makes the difference to how beneficial what we do is to others. So I love being in this conversation. It's the greatest adventure I've ever faced. It's everything I thought I would get to with drugs and alcohol and all of the meandering I did in that regard. It's more than that because I don't have the hangover, and I get to build and grow on the building and the growth as the days pass, rather than have to tear it all down and start over again with some new concoction of intoxication. So we appreciate anyone listening, and we know you're out there. We may not know your face or your place or your name, but if you're there, you're listening, and we know you're there. We know you're with us, and we are happy to have you here with us now.
All right. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Pedro.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Jack. See you
Thank
next
you,
week.
gentlemen.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.